I don't think he likes this idea of super PACs any more than I do. I think where it's gone is not something people are comfortable with.
What about the whole issue of Bain? Came up a lot in the days and weeks now leading up to this debate. I think the strongest language, and it came up, was from Governor Perry, vulture capitalism, casting ethics aside, and issues like that. And also the question of how many jobs, net did you create? Was it 100,000 jobs? You mentioned Staples. You mentioned the sporting goods store. That
Sports Authority. Those four alone,
yeah.
Sports Authority, Staples, Bright Horizons Children's Centers, and Steel Dynamics, have today about 120,000 jobs. And we were there at the beginning. We helped found them. Of all the companies that I was involved with that actually jobs were lost, they've been reported on by all sorts of people who've investigated this, and it maybe up to less than 10,000. So do the math. 120,000 less 10,000, and it's over 100,000.
Can you explain, maybe some people just don't understand what is involved? Some of these companies, were they headed for bankruptcy if they didn't have an infusion of cash? Was the likelihood that they were to go bankrupt high when you invested money in some of the companies? You know,
well, some businesses.
In other words, were they going to lose all those jobs?
Well, some were in real difficulty. I remember one that lost over $50 million the year before we made the investment to try and help turn it around, and it's still in business today, I understand. So in some cases, we were able to make some turnarounds that saved some jobs. And in my own experience, which is I've run 4 operations or been the leader of 4 operations, one a consulting firm, one a venture capital and private equity firm, the other an Olympics, and the other a state. All 4 of those were successful and grew. And we invested in lots of others. But, you know, I'm happy to describe my experience in the private sector. What I think is a little unusual is to have fellow Republicans attacking what is an integral part of our private sector. Michael Moore apparently said today, I think Newt Gingrich is one of the escaped members of my staff. He says, this is what I've been saying for 20 years. It's like, you know, if you're carrying Michael Moore's water, that's a bit of a problem.
All right, I'll let you bring that up. But Newt, you have another debate I hear coming up later this week. Let me ask you one last question before we have to let you go, because it's interesting. A lot of people that are writing me are concerned. This is getting pretty personal in these campaigns. Things are getting pretty tough. You've been pretty tough with your ads against Newt, against Santorum, the super PAC.
Actually,
not you.
Actually, not me. Actually, you watched this
super
debate.
PAC.
You watched the debate tonight.
Yeah.
I don't think you heard me criticize anybody on the stage.
I'm talking more about the feeling.
And likewise, the ads that we have all been positive. So, you know, I'm going to take exception with the premise.
It's the premise being the super. I can tell you from speaking with the other candidates, there's palpable anger about the super PAC ads, and they had wanted you to denounce them and say that
anything that's inaccurate, and I said this in the last debate, they should take them off the air.
You haven't looked at them? You haven't seen them?
No, I haven't seen them. I got reported on one of them. I got the report on one, but the others, and there are a bunch out there, I haven't seen them. The one that Santorum spoke about with regards to felons, it sounds like it's accurate.
You have
Someone
any
who's
worry,
been in jail is a felon, but anyway.
Any worry that the party will unite behind the eventual nominee? You've won Iowa, you've won New Hampshire.
None whatsoever.
So this will all pass away.
Even if it's not me, even if it's someone else, I'm going to unite behind them. We have on that stage 5 people, any one of which is better than Barack Obama, and we're going to get behind that nominee and make sure that we take this country back.
I don't know if 4 years ago people would have predicted that you and John McCain were getting along as well today. So,
you know, we're all on the same team. We have some differences. There's no question we have differences, and differences in background. I mean, my life was spent in the private sector, and the other guys spent their time primarily in government. So there are some differences in background, but our views on issues are pretty close,
pretty nuanced.
And there are some points of significance, but where we come in different directions.
Yeah,
particularly
Ron Paul said 0% of the
well,
rate.
I'm not quite sure how we're going to have a military with 0% taxes.
All right,
but, you know,
it was interesting. You notice every number kept going down as they went across. Governor, good to see you again.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Sean.
much for being with us.
Good to see you.
And coming up, GOP presidential candidates Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum. They're going to join us live in the spin room. We'll also check in with Juan Williams. He had a pretty heated debate with Newt Gingrich tonight. Dick Morris, as the special edition of Hannity live from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, continues.
The difference between Barack Obama and the 5 of us, that we actually think work is good. We actually think saying to somebody, I'll help you if you're willing to help yourself is good. And we think unconditional efforts by the best food stamp president in American history to maximize dependency is terrible for the future of this country.
And welcome back to this post-debate spin room edition of Hannity. We are live in Myrtle Beach. We're in South Carolina tonight. That was former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, at tonight's big debate. And joining me now from the spin room, the man himself, Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, how are you?
Great to be with you.
Frank Luntz said something that in all these debates that have taken place this year, no candidate had gotten a standing ovation until tonight. The line you used on the standing ovation?
Well, it was that we believe in work and that we believe that people should learn to work and that we're opposed to dependency and that Obama, is the best food stamp president in history, is increasing dependency when we want to increase the opportunity to be independent and to work. I think it wasn't me. I think the audience felt spontaneously that that was the value that most Americans really cherish.
This was in response to a question by Juan Williams, and then he asked, well, saying Obama's a food stamp president, all the people on food stamps, etc. You actually ended up with saying, we want people to get a job, a better job, and then own the job or own the business.
Right. I mean, people don't realize, I first got into this because some left-wingers used to say, oh, don't go get a hamburger flipping job. Now, McDonald's is the largest trainer of work in the world. More young people learn how to show up on time, how to stay for the whole job, how to actually make change, how to clean up something, how to have a boss from these kind of jobs. And it's the beginning. And both my daughters were reminding me, they both worked at an early age. I worked at an early age. I bet you worked at an early age.
12, I was scrubbing pots and pans every Friday, Saturday night at a restaurant.
And you learned...
By the way, without a machine. Right. I had to do them all by hand.
And you got money for it. And you learned that it was exciting to get money.
Yeah.
And you've been working ever since.
The funny thing is, just last week, I got in touch with the person that had hired me because he heard me talking about it on my radio show. But I think it was one of the best things that happened. What does it mean if you suggest that it's good for people to get a job? You talked about how much janitors in New York make. They do make a pretty astronomical amount of money. What is it?
You can hire 30 young people part-time for one janitor. So you take a school that has 4 or 5 janitors, keep the top 2, take the bottom 3. You now have 90 kids who have an incentive to not drop out. They have to go to school to have their little job. Their little job gives them cash. They have pride in what they're doing. They begin to have pride in the school. They learn the work ethic. It's just a win-win strategy.
Another big line of the night is you were talking about 99 weeks of unemployment is an associate's degree. Work is good.
Yeah.
Do you think the country has lost touch with that a little bit?
No, the country has.
You don't think the country
has? The elites have, the media has, Washington has. I have yet to have a single audience that doesn't applaud when I say to them, we should modernize unemployment compensation by having a study requirement. If you sign up, you don't have a job, you should have to sign up for a business-led training program so that you actually learn something while we're paying you. And now you have a human capital investment program, not a sit-around-and-do-nothing program. Every audience I've discussed it in the last 6 months has applauded.
I just had Governor Romney on, and the whole issue of the super PACs have come up. And I said to him, having interviewed you and Rick Santorum and Rick Perry and all the other candidates, I said, look, there's palpable anger about those super PACs supporting you, and whether or not you have the ability to tell them to stop. Right. Last week, you said to a super PAC supporting you, bringing up the Bain issue, you told them to stop. To what extent was he right in saying, no, the campaign finance laws really need to change because you don't have any control over your super PAC, he doesn't have any control over his?
Well, I think he's right on that. I told him after the debate, the candidates ought to put together a letter to the Congress. If we had a very simple law that said anyone can give any amount of after-tax income to a candidate as long as they report it that night so everybody knows who's financing who, you would clean up 90% of this, because if a candidate had to put their face and name at the end of an ad, it would clean up most of the really bitter, miserable stuff overnight because people just wouldn't do it.
What does it mean, John Huntsman getting out? What does it mean that it seems if we're to buy the premise of your argument that this is about a Massachusetts moderate versus Reagan conservatives when you and Senator Santorum and Governor Perry are going for the more conservative vote in a state like South Carolina. What does that mean?
It means that I have an assignment for the next 5 days to convince conservatives in South Carolina that the only way to stop a moderate from getting the nomination is to vote for Newt Gingrich. It's clear from the polls. I'm much closer to beating Romney than anybody else. And so people have to decide, do you just want to have a protest vote and allow a moderate to be nominated, or do you want to stop Romney and have a conservative nominee by voting for me? And that's my major assignment, is to go out. And then secondly, I have an assignment of convincing people that I can be much tougher debating Barack Obama. I would be a much tougher candidate.
You seem pretty comfortable out there debating. Is that your...
Oh, I'm very comfortable out there.
You like it? I think one of the more interesting lines of the night, I don't think Ron Paul particularly liked it, and that is that you kill America's enemies.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, the instinct of the American people is to say, you're going to come to New York City and kill 3,100 Americans? And you want us to go through some legal mumbo jumbo if we can kill you? Give me a break. I think we want a country that's safe because our enemies respect us and fear us. We don't want a country so locked up in lawyers that we're getting attacked all the time.
All right. Mr. Speaker, good to see you.
Great to be with you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
And Frank Luntz gave you a lot of credit tonight for the first standing ovation in a debate. So
it was amazing.
I bet you're pretty happy. And coming up next, former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. He's here as we continue live from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. That plus analysis from Juan Williams, Dick Morris, and much, much more straight ahead. Welcome back to this post-debate spin room edition of Hannity. We're live in beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and joining me now is the candidate who says the coveted endorsement from the national evangelical leaders that he landed over the weekend is greatly helping his campaign right here in the Palmetto State. Former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. How are you? Good to see you, Senator.
Doing great. Thanks, Sean. Thanks.
All right. Well, what about the evangelicals? They met in Texas over the weekend, and you had a consensus.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty remarkable. It's about 150 people. All the candidates had people there, helping them, working with them, and at least from everything I was told, there was very little expectation there would be a consensus, and they ended up making the arguments for the candidates. Sent sort of a team of folks we did down there to make the case, and they left, and then left it for those folks to decide what to do. And they had a ballot. One person dropped off. They took the last person off. It came to Newt and me, and they wanted 2/3 majority. We came within a hair of the 2/3, and they said, well, we'll give it one more chance to see if we can get a consensus enough to endorse. And we ended up with 75% of the vote. So folks who had voted for Newt switched over and supported us. And I think it shows that, look, we've run 2 primaries so far, and I've finished on the top of the conservative pack, if you will. And I think they also recognize that if you're looking for a real consistent conservative on all of the issues, I'm just a stronger conservative than Newt is on a lot of these issues. And Newt's a friend, but he's been far too ephemeral on too many issues, like his attack on capitalism here recently. We need someone who's reliable, who's going to be steady, who's going to stand up and fight for the principles that you believe in here, and not sort of move as conditions move.
You got into it a little bit with Governor Romney, too, as well tonight, over the issue of the super PAC. Now, maybe the issue of the rights of felons to vote is maybe not the top issue in the campaign, especially with 10% unemployment here in the state of South Carolina. But I think it was the principle that was at stake.
It's an integrity issue. People, people are looking for a president who they can trust, who believes it's authentic, and someone that is going to look at the American public and say, if this is what I say, this is what this is the truth, and this is what I believe. And for his super PAC to attack us on an issue where actually Governor Romney's record is, at least in their terms, weaker than mine. And for the governor to try to song and dance this and then say at the end, I said, will you take him down? And he said, well, if anything's false. That's not what presidents do. That's not what leaders do. If you find something that is wrong, you come out and say this is wrong, it should be off the air, and you should take it off the air.
What about his argument that he doesn't have control over it? I asked him about this on the program, because there's real anger. I mean, Newt, we saw what happened at Iowa. He was pretty angry.
He's hiding behind the veil that somehow or another, because you can't directly talk to this group, that you have no influence over them. These are all people that work for him. These are people who, prior to the establishment of the super PAC, were his inner circle of folks. The idea that if Governor Romney went out, or if I went out with respect to my super PAC and said, I want you to take this off the air. No, I can't directly communicate with you in private, but in public, I can look at that and say, this is wrong. And if you're representing my interest, stop it. And he won't do that because he doesn't want to do that. He wants to keep this the veil of I can't do anything to perpetuate